Good morning. It is such an honor to be asked to open this marvelous concept. Now, can you hear me? Is this little mic up here doing its job? Excellent. Even if I could say no to nuns, which apparently I cannot, and wouldn't want to, I also firmly believe that this is exactly what is needed at this time in history, and not just in the history of the church, but in the history of our country and the world. Though I actually had to smile as I watched this conference unfold under the title of Given. If my 20-something self had to guess what kind of conference I'd be speaking at in my 50s, it would probably have the name Taking, or Looking Out for Number One, or something like that. I was the 12-year-old who announced to my father that I was a feminist who thought that men were really completely dispensable. And remember, this is my, flee Cuba, flee Castro father, who thought that to say feminist was to say communist. I was the 18-year-old president of my college women's singing group. Now, it was a formerly all-male college, and so the men's group got more than the women's, right? So the men had, Hilton hotels, Greyhound buses, and a refrigerator full of beer. I had a closet. Literally twice on bus trips, the bus is going down the hill, and I saw this big tire going beside it, and I was like, God, where's that tire coming from down there? It was us. And we stayed at motels with hourly rates and mirrors in really unexpected places, because that's the money we had. So I wrote up a 21-page petition to the head of the school, the priest, and threatened him with public outing if he did not add our budgets together and divide them in half. Now, this was not just a matter of doing something for principle. I was not satisfied till there was no beer in that refrigerator. That was me, okay? By the time I was 24, I was an attorney whose idea of success included only getting thinner, smarter, and more winning. But of course, like anyone who reflects on life for more than 2 minutes, with anybody who understands anything, knows that this is not a recipe for happiness, let alone for the Christian life. So fast forward, let's get past my 3 pack-a-day smoking habit, my weird stress disorders from working 24/7 as a litigator at a large firm, past my wondering how I was going to pay all those student loans when I chucked my big firm life, and I chucked it all at 27, and began to think vocationally, which for me meant graduate school in theology, which I thought it would help me get my head figured out, and a found vocation to serve the church, and hopefully the world, as a lawyer and a communicator on every neuralgic issue you can think of over the last 30 years. Now, on the one hand, it has not been smooth sailing, right? I mean, how many times did I stand in the green room at ABC holding a colicky baby thinking, I wonder if anybody will hold this baby while I do an interview with a moderator who, it is not my imagination, is out to get me, right? Or having articles rejected and wondering if it was because I was really stupid or because of my prior pro-life work and the journal just didn't want to feature me. On the other hand, it's been very smooth sailing. If the metric is whether I grew in the knowledge of when to turn down even really cool opportunities because I really needed to spend time with my husband and my kids. Whether I grew in expertise that people really seem to need, or whether I feel a tremendous synergy between all that I've been given by God and my parents and my husband and my kids and all that I am still burning to give. So now I am totally on board with this whole given thing, right? Body and soul, and feeling like maybe I am speaking at the right conference after all. So I would like to help you think about this at a time when we're really living amidst profound questions, and they are addressed to you as women. And leave it, of course, to the sisters to call us together and to tell us the whole truth about women's freedom and happiness that you don't get at other conferences. That is, that it really can only be done successfully in light of Christ and in light of your conversion, wherever you are, whatever your age, to being the kind of person who, when you go somewhere, you bring Christ with you. And people say, oh, wow, I see something here. And I want to be like that. But now, now that I'm on board with the given thing, I have the difficult task of offering you something that is not from the playbook of the exceedingly obvious, right? Because neither you nor anyone else with common sense believes that a happy or a Christian life is about taking. Everyone knows that nobody says on their deathbed, wow, I wished I'd had more me time, you know? Or I'm really sorry I gave such lavish gifts. Or I wished I hadn't helped out so many family and friends. That was really a bummer. Still, I believe that I must have something to offer, because although no one says these things when they're dying, everybody experiences internal resistance to living as if their most essential identity is as a gifted giver. But again, the usual reasons for this are pretty often named and explored, right? And you've probably heard them all. Materialism, individualism, certain strands of feminism, an uncertain economy. I could go on. You've heard all of these. And all of these are correct, I think. But I think there is something more and something deeper to this resistance. I notice this in the area where I teach, family law. But it's true elsewhere, too. And I'm going to call it a resistance to the whole notion of twoness. And by this, yes, I do mean resistance to the whole notion of two sexes. In other words, we are encouraged to reject things that are associated with women and instead to be either like men or androgynous or sexually fluid. We are also discouraged or told to ignore cooperation between the sexes. But I think it goes much deeper than this, because the twoness of the sexes represents, accomplishes, and grounds all other kinds of important things in both the human and the divine economy. I'm going to elaborate on this a bit later, but here's the kinds of things I'm referring to. God's creating two sexes represents, in a very fundamental way, the possibility for diversity to coexist alongside perfect equality. Two sexes is the central evidence that dependency, interdependency, giving and receiving are the fundamental way of the human person. Two sexes symbolizes all that can happen when different things work together. They create, they grow, they make new life. And of course, two sexes is how God personally decided to image himself in this world. From Genesis, in the image of God he made them, male and female he made them. All of this, which means that an environment stacked against the twoness of sexes is an environment that is also stacked against diversity of every type, coexisting with perfect equality in the eyes of God and every human person. Diversity of race, of nation, of age, of appearance, of religion. It's an environment stacked against understanding the human way as the way of relationship. It's an environment stacked against welcoming new life. And it's an environment stacked against understanding who God is and how he chose to relate to us. So here's how I'm going to explore this with you today. I'm going to first talk about the signs of the times against twoness, but also how twoness will not be squelched. It's just in us, and it comes out. I'll try to unpack some of the signs embedded in humanity's being created in two sexes. I'll speak about an understanding of God, given that the image of God is two sexes that make three. I will talk about people's fear of twoness, and then I'll talk about some approaches, I hope, from the heart of the Christian life. So first, signs of the times against twoness, right? I'm sure it's come to your attention, 100 times a day, that there is a growing rejection of the twoness of the sexes, against the idea that there's differences between them, as if who says difference says women are second, right? I was at the University of Chicago Law School giving a lecture some months ago, and it was about complementarity. It was in family law, but one of the students in the Chicago family law class says to me after the lecture, "Name me a single difference between men and women. Just one." Okay, but that's where it's gotten to, right? There is a also suggestion that there's really just one kind of human who is on a sexual continuum that is quite fluid. There's also a great deal in feminist and family law literature, a continuing deep, deep suspicion of marriage as problematic for women's freedom. Marriage is violent. marriage as cabining women. And ironically, the most positive things said about marriage in the recent decades are found in the Supreme Court cases upholding same-sex marriage. Though, if you care to read those cases closely, you'll see that what they're celebrating is the claim that marriage gives an individual the kind of dignity and social place they are seeking. They are not actually celebrating the community. They are celebrating the gain of this right as a blow for the individual. There is another place where twoness is lauded nowadays, but a twoness that is based on no commitment, and that would be cohabitation. Like same-sex marriage, cohabitation is celebrated because of its benefit for the individual. That is, you will be able to test the cohabiting partner and see if he or she meets your standards. So twoness is celebrated. Oh, it's great to be together, etc., but only insofar as it benefits the one who is testing the other. The rejection of twoness is very much evident in the contemporary marketplace for male-female relationships. No matter that cargo ships full of studies show that women highly prefer romance and commitment, they do not seek or enjoy casual sex the way studies show that men do. But any who breathe a word that women's preferences are different than men's in this are sent packing from polite society. And you probably won't even be allowed to visit the pantheon of cool women anymore, right? You're just out. You have to say that you have the same sexual preferences as men, or you are told that you want to put women in second place. There's also today a hermeneutic of suspicion, if you will, toward the unique power of the two sexes to procreate. The state and some feminist groups continually claim that women's highest and most central freedom is the receipt of free contraception, followed by abortion if contraception fails. This claim, to put it mildly, casts a really dark shadow on procreation. If you look at the government's briefs in the HHS contraception and abortion mandate cases, they say without free contraception, women are inevitably relegated to a lesser social and economic place. That this is the key. It reminds me of that line from the movie Freaky Friday where the mother says to the girl something about if she doesn't obey her, she will be consigned to a phoneless, dateless Amish existence. I always imagine this coming out of Ruth Bader Ginsburg's mouth. Without free contraception and abortion, we are in a phoneless, dateless Amish existence, is really how they envision it. There is also the continual decrying of the time that women put in to caring for children, and also the elderly. You will almost never see a study coming out of the White House Office of Women or HHS or any of the leading feminist groups that doesn't follow with a report on the amount of time women spend caring for the elderly or for the disabled or children. And then the next sentence doesn't begin, sadly, comma, right? We haven't got a state substitute for this yet. Or sadly, comma, women are still choosing to do this. They perceive it as a problem, a hermeneutic of suspicion. There is also, of course, the effort to replace the womb technologically, or to create life in the lab, to clone babies for same-sex couples. In short, to short-circuit what the two sexes can do, to say mothering is enough, fathering is enough. We really don't need, or maybe even want, both. At the workplace, of course, there's still resistance to two sexes. There is still the expectation that the woman will operate at the level of the 1950s male ideal worker, right? It's shocking in a country as advanced and wealthy as ours that there is still almost no flexibility, paid leave, family leave, etc., that most people can really access, or for as long as they really need to access it, okay? Yet, twoness, people's desire for it, their longing, their reaching for it, cannot be squelched. Last time I looked, solitary confinement was still the penultimate punishment for a human being short of death, right? Capital punishment. People report themselves far happier when they have someone in their life on whom they can unconditionally rely, whether it is a spouse, a friend, a sibling, a parent. people still long for marriage. Interestingly, if you added together the age in the United States when people have their first cohabitation and the age at first marriage, we would see that people's first union, the age of it, has not increased for the last 100 years. Isn't that interesting? It's around 23, average. If you put together marriage and cohabitation in the United States, people are longing for something more permanent. Now, sadly, of course, cohabitation is the opposite, right? It still not only is correlated with, but has causal relationship to divorce. But more and more, particularly for women, in the mating market that we now have, where sex is, in the words of the famous sociologist Anthony Giddens, it's plastic. It means whatever you say it means at the moment it's happening, because it's been divorced from the whole idea even that it's the place where new life comes. Because of this, we know that people are longing for union, but they're choosing this explicitly uncommitted short-term union, but it still shows the longing. Women think this is now part of the path to marriage, right? They don't realize it's a trap on the way there, but people still seeking it. It is a sign of people's desire for twoness, right? And then, of course, every once in a while, from time to time, a celebrity, let's say Adele, lets it slip that her life is full of new and unexpected meaning because of a child. And non-celebrities say the same thing every day, even if it's not in the New York Daily News, which, of course, has a lot of meaning because children aren't working for the farm anymore. It's against every utilitarian bone in the adult body to say, I want a child. Because it's not like they're going to work and contribute to the family household income anymore, right? The child is a longed for growth in the community and the size of the love in that household. And a great sign that people long for relationship. And interestingly, even in the manuals of the leading business consultancies in the United States and Europe, including Deloitte, they point out that teams of men and women working together do better at management and profit making than do teams of men alone. That apparently they give this great example where they have men and women together at a meeting and the men are all caught up in how fabulous this system is they're trying to sell. And the women are going, you've lost the 4 people over there. They're just drifted off. You're going to need to try another approach. No, but the system is so cool. No, you've lost them, right? And apparently when men and women work together on these teams, management, sales, etc., goes much better. So the natural attraction of twoness isn't dead. It's just more and more invisible where the power of one is being celebrated. But what gets lost when the good of two is ignored? The deep meanings that arise from a two-sexed humanity. That, as I said, diversity is good and coexists with equality. I mean, it's so ironic, isn't it, that in a world awash with conversation about diversity, that one of the few places you are not permitted to talk about actual differences is as between men and women. It's fascinating. Also lost is the idea that dependency or interdependency are the way of life. That I need you and you need me. That when differences come together and collaborate, there is synergy, and it's a natural human product. And not just in men and women coming together to make children, but also in every arena where men and women really work together. What also is lost is the idea that I can understand myself better by understanding who you are, and then I understand myself in distinction from you. I have this experience with my husband every day for the last 31 years. I'm like, oh, so that's another way of doing things. Really? Is that really any good? Oh, is this what I do that is helpful here? Or is this what I do that is a problem? Other goods also get obscured when twoness is overshadowed by oneness. The whole idea of cooperation, solidarity, empathy, gratitude. I mean, right? It takes two for all of these things that we recognize as human goods, but it takes two and it takes differences in order for these goods to even be brought out of us. To undervalue or to ignore twoness is to undervalue and ignore all of these known goods of human behavior, human society. And then in addition, of course, we start from the knowledge that God made two sexes as his image. So that when we lose twoness, we lose this crucial angle for understanding God and his plan to reconcile all things in himself. we lose touch with God as Trinity, right? And I know that seems really obscure. I was teaching my son the Trinity. It's like saying I was teaching my son Greek, right? Yeah. I was teaching my son the Trinity. But one of the things we know is that the Trinity, in Benedict, when you ask Pope Benedict, what's the deal with the Trinity? He says, well, we have to deal with it because it's a historical fact. Because first we had God the Father in the Old Testament, and then comes Jesus, and Jesus said, I'm from the Father. And so we go, oh, okay, well, we have to deal with two of you. And he says, I'm not the Father, but I'm from the Father, and I'm in relationship with the Father, but also what you see in me is what you see in the Father, and so forth. So, and then we talk about sending forth the Holy Spirit. So we're confronted with the Trinity as a matter of history of our faith, so we have to deal with it. It's a difficult thing to understand, but part of the way we can understand the Trinity is understanding men and women and the children who are brought forth, right? Like that, Margaret McCarthy, this fabulous theologian at the John Paul II Institute, has this wonderful reflection on Jesus saying that Jesus did not deem equality with the Father something to be grasped at, but rather emptied himself and took the form of a slave. And she talks about this as a way of understanding men and women. So all of that grasping to take beer out of their refrigerator, or to call men, useless, or to beat them at the legal game and be a partner at their firm as a woman, and, step on a few guys on the way there, apparently that's not the way. Apparently that's grasping, right? And so to understand the relationship between the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit as a way of our behaving, and then to understand them by watching how we interact in a truly loving fashion, not grasping, but equality as mutual service. Even the sociology on the success of marriage talks about marriages succeed when they are out of a philosophy, if you will, a practice of abundance and mutual gift giving. Well, boy, but if that doesn't describe the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, I don't know what does, right? If we lose touch with God's making two sexes in his image, we lose touch with Jesus' radical otherness. I mean, it's so radical, it's frightening to contemplate how other-focused we would have to be. But if we understand that we're created in God's image immediately with a relationship to an other to whom we have to give and from whom we will receive, and it's pretty radical, we had a glimpse into understanding Jesus' radical otherness. We also lose an understanding of the entire project of God reconciling humanity to himself. And I don't know, I'm just going to steal outright the words of N.T. Wright, Tom Wright, an Anglican theologian. He was a big part of the Humanum series, and he is, I don't think anybody's ever said it better. It's a bit of a lengthy quote, but he spoke on one of the Humanum films, and I met him and worked with him on his talk for Humanum. And he talks about the male and female as representing God's project to reconcile heaven and earth. Listen to a few of his words. He says, one of the fascinating things about the Bible is that it begins and ends with the coming together of heaven and earth. From the beginning, we're told God made heaven and earth, and so it seems they are meant to work together. Then, as the story in Genesis 1 unfolds, we have not only heaven and earth, we have the sea and the dry land. We have plants and animals. Those were the images you saw in the Humanum film, right? And then the story reaches its great climax in the creation of human beings in the image of God, male and female, different, but together. When we read Genesis, then we see that these complementarities are meant to work together, so that man and woman together are a symbol of something which is profoundly true of creation as a whole, the coming together of heaven and earth. When we then jump in a huge sweep to the end of the Bible, the new Jerusalem is coming down from heaven like a bride adorned for her husband, so that we have the symbolism of marriage, of male and female coming together. Now it's important, he continues, to begin with the big picture. If we don't, we can easily come to believe that what the Bible says about marriage is a set of rules. We have imagined that the purpose God wants us for is to leave earth and go to heaven instead. But this isn't just a parody of the truth, it's a radical distortion of the Bible. As humans, we are called to live as symbols of heaven and earth coming together. The creation which was given at the beginning and which is to be consummated, as the book of Revelation shows, at the end. This is why I believe, he continues, the biblical picture of man and woman in marriage is not something about which we can say, Oh well, they had some funny rules back then. We know better now. The biblical view of marriage is part of the larger whole of new creation. It symbolizes and points to the divine plan. Marriage is a sign of all things in heaven and earth coming together in Christ. Okay? End of quote. You got to see, we have him on one of the films. You have to see it. In short, then, if we lose the idea of the significance of the twoness, the otherness, and yet the complete unity of the man and the woman, we lose a much larger understanding of God's plan to unite us with himself, although he is always also other, okay? But still, my next point, people are afraid of twoness. Some interpret two as always prone to ranking. Thus, Simone de Beauvoir's book, The Second Sex, which relies a great deal on the dangers of affirming what is other than male as being female. And of course, when there is more than one thing to understand at a time, when there's differences between two, and because of the intense possibilities in particular and risks in the intensity of a male-female romantic relationship, and because when you choose to allow yourself to be interdependent, to be both giver and receiver, who needs, who waits, then twoness can also mean complexity, strong differences of opinion, confusion, conflict, even violence. In other words, alongside or alternative to cooperation, empathy, solidarity, all those beautiful possibilities of twoness I talked about before, there can be selfishness, hard-heartedness, betrayal. And all of this is not only possible, but it happens. You've seen it. I've seen it. It happens every day. Yet should we allow these risks, which now that we have spotted them, maybe we can manage better? Should we allow these risks? Should we allow sin to have the last word when God's intentions about the good of two and their deeper, even cosmic meanings are so very clear? We cannot avoid twoness because of its risks. So what are we to do? As Christians, I think we have to start by affirming, really as an element of our faith, the good of the two sexes as the very image of God. We have to come to understand what John Paul II was getting at in that 1995 letter to women, when after thanking us for this and that and this other stuff that women had done in history, he actually says, "Women, I thank you for being women." Now, I will be frank with you. I used to feel a little patronized by that line. I would say, all right, I get it. You're stressing your feminist bona fides, okay? We get it. Right? I was actually at a conference with John Paul II in the later 90s, and it was about women and the family. And he had Parkinson's pretty badly by that time, and he was sitting in his great chair at a pretty small audience that was very nice. And he picked up his thing to read and kind of shook it, and then he sort of stabilized his arm as he did in the later days. And he says in very heavily accented English, "I am the feminist pope." And then he threw his head back and started laughing, right? It was great. And then he shakes his paper and starts reading it. So I used to feel patronized by that line, thanking us for being women. But of course, as usual, he was smarter than me, not to mention prophetic. For has come the moment, and it is now, when the value of twoness, when the value of our being unabashedly women is commonly and carelessly and daily denied. So in addition to placing our faith in God's decision to make two who are other but also united, it is helpful to do several things. I think first, to thank God for our sex and to pray to be enlightened about the particular calling that we have. And then, believe me, I didn't come to that easily. When I was a teenager, you have no idea what it was like in the 70s, okay? Let me just say, to be the women on the cusp of the first women going to law school in this particular place, the first women in a formerly male college. We have 3 women in a firm of 200 lawyers. This is great. You wanted to win. You wanted to be like the guys. So to thank God for your sex is not a small act. okay? And it's still a bold thing to do. And I did not have that grace in the 70s. I have it now, but I didn't have it then. Seek also to see and manage your differences with men, but also with any of those who are different from us in any way, as opportunities for learning, for understanding, for loving, okay? It is amazing what you can see in another person when you go looking, and that how the encounter with that other person tells you so much about yourself. I also recommend cultivating particular spiritual attitudes. First, regarding yourself, to have patience with discerning God's call. For me, it wasn't until my much later 20s that I could even begin to see these little weird building blocks of my life, my little weird basket of gifts. I'm sure you all think you're weird. I mean, just for me, like, I studied singing opera. I really like to sew. I like to do construction and repairing of furniture. I love the law. And I love theology. What do you do with that? Right? What do you do with that? It wasn't until my late 20s that I saw my basket of gifts come together. Have patience with God's call. Listen to trusted people who really love you, and their evaluations of your strengths and weaknesses. Don't judge your contributions negatively if they seem stereotypically feminine. You're like, ugh, I really shouldn't be thinking like this. It's probably because I'm just a girl. Sex is socially constructed, blah, blah, blah. It turns out in global studies, and not just a few, of women's preferences, that women choose more feminine things in the freest societies. That societies in which women are freest to choose about education, about jobs, about lifestyles, they actually choose more paradigmatically feminine things. In other words, you find more of them in the work of service, right? Running hospitals, schools, taking care of people. It just happens, okay? Cultivate the attitude earlier than I did, that your particular gifts are forgiving, okay? If you think of your gifts as for winning out, as for being number one, you will never be happy. You just won't. There's always some gunner coming up behind you, beside you, who is smarter and faster and younger and all these things that you think you want to be. It will never bring you happiness. It wasn't until my 40s, after struggling to write for tenure, etc., that I thought to myself, this is just no way to live. This is awful. You know, there's always going to be the next scholar and the next article and the next paper. That I thought, what is the place that I have an expertise and there is a big yawning chasm of need, and develop an expertise there? This is to understand for service. This is to be an expert in a useful way, what Etienne Gilson calls intelligence in the service of Christ. Yes, you want to be the best person in the room in what you do. You do. You want to be the smartest, most gifted person in the room. You want to work toward that. That because you really want what? To put that at the service of others. And you're not going to give it away unless it's worth giving, unless it's beautiful. You want to be needed, you want to serve, you want to be appreciated, you want to be challenged, all at the same time. Only the context of service can make that happen for you. An added benefit, and I've said this many times publicly, you will never be bored. You will never, ever be bored when you are seeking to be good in order to serve. What about spiritual attitudes toward others? I had an encounter with Pope Benedict's Deus Caritas Est. Actually, just Pope Benedict is my favorite theologian, just period, just amazing. I can never get enough of him. Who wrote in Deus Caritas Est, after talking about God as love, he says, am I really asking you to deal with every person you meet? You know, every person, everyone strewn across the path of the Good Samaritan with love. And he says, yes, I am asking you, I am telling you that Christianity requires giving every person that look of love they crave. I find that even looking people in the eye and noticing they exist, people who are serving, right? People at parking garages and restaurants and students and clients and, you know, whoever you're serving in a retail establishment, whatever. To even notice they exist, to listen, to be polite, to make eye contact, to smile, to greet them, to build in a little time for a little interaction, right? It's a spiritual discipline that then you can bring into your workplace and into your family life. Practice giving away more than you reasonably can. Practice sacrificial giving. with others. Giving away something that somebody really loves and you can part with, even if it costs you, even if it's painful, right? And then put your talents at the service of the church, which will also mean putting them at the service of the world. The church needs the contribution of women. And I've seen this in so many different ways. I don't say this loosely, right? When I started my law firm practice, I went to the firm that represented a diocese because I knew, even as a very young person, that the church was part of my family and I wanted to do something for her. And so I've seen from there to the time I was working with the U.S. bishops and now to the time that I have just been collaborating with the church writ large in the world, some of the very specific instances of the way the church needs women. When I was head of the investigation of sexual abuse in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, it struck me over the head 1,000 times during that investigation that if a woman had been running the office, particularly a mother, that had received the complaints, we would have put an end to this cancer in the church at a much earlier time. We also know that when Pope Francis talks about the church as a field hospital, out there meeting people, that women, as John Allen, the Vatican writer, writes so beautifully about this, that women are its front lines, right? We just are out there. We are dealing with the people who are suffering day in and day out. Women have a women have a talent for prioritizing people and not systems, and to see how they can mess around with the system, if that's what's needed, in order to serve people. The church also needs women's voices regarding how we experience freedom in the context of the church's teachings about sex, marriage, parenting, relations with the opposite sex overall. The modern brief against the church is largely a brief against the way the church deals with women and sex, okay? And only women can be the most effective people to speak about this. There will always be certain ministries in the church and in the world that women will be more drawn to than men. If you look at the women who have won the Nobel Peace Prizes, anti-landmines, pro-peace between warring factions, tribes, races, religions, etc., anti-capital punishment. I mean, these are the kinds of things that women are renowned for. This is not just cultural messages. This is nature. This is who women are. And of course, women have been the backbone of the pro-life movement since the very beginning. I can't even tell you how many women's houses I stayed with, how many women I prayed with, how many, children's bunk beds I slept in, crisis pregnancy centers I worked in, bake sales I participated in with the women who saw the pro-life movement through its days of invisibility to its days today, where it is extremely present on the national scene. So I leave you with that. I thank you for the honor of letting me open this. I thank the sisters. This was the hardest thing I've written in a long time because it seems obvious, but apparently it's not easy. So I wish you, and I don't really have to wish, the word hope, Christian hope is applicable here because it will come to pass that your next days will be absolutely marvelous. God bless you, and thank you so much for having me.